Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Communications and Conversations. I'm your host, John Crook. I got a studio guest in here today, kind of like the unofficial co-host. I'm going to start calling him my Ed McMahon on there. So we got a good show for you planned today. Tackling another question that kind of comes up a lot on there. And today's topic is going to be about repeaters. That's right, repeaters. How to repeat the repeating of the signals and all that fun stuff on there. And, repeater technology has come a long way. And we're going to kind of look at a little bit of the history of it. Look at some things that people weren't really aware of when talking about repeaters and what have you. So I think it's going to be a really good episode today. Thank you to all the fans and everything like that have actually so far written in and said, hey, John, I like the show and everything. Great to have it back. Some people said they understand why we changed it from communications and cigars to communications and conversations. And I'm not even fully on the name yet. I've caught myself, some people saying, yeah, communications and cigars. I'm like, well, I know we're conversations now. And there's a few people that agreed with me, and they said, hey, John, I understand why you did what you did, but nevertheless, I'm still glad you're doing the content. They were more worried, as one person said, he's like, you know what, a name is a name on there. If that's what's going to make people happy, then you want to do it, go ahead and do that. But if you want to keep it cigars, I would still turn in. And I was like, hey, in a reply back, hey, thanks a lot for that. And we do appreciate that. But nevertheless, without further ado, let us bring in our co-host today, the quasi Ed McMahon, as we said, Wally N9VAO. How you doing, Wally?
Oh, I'm doing good, John. Hey, thanks for letting me come on board with you again this week.
Yeah, we talked about the last one about their channel plans and stuff like that. So we was like, hey, let's get you in back for another episode. But I got to ask something before we go. Start off on the show today. If you're watching on the YouTube channel, the YouTubers thingy, what is up with your picture?
Well, I don't know how familiar a lot of people out there are familiar with the James Bond movies, but as you can see, that was when one of the several times I've been a stand-in for him on some of the stunts. Instead of either Pierce Brosnan doing it, they'd have me step in.
They did.
That was when I was on a motorcycle with her.
Oh, okay. So this was one of the Pierce Brosnan ones. I think it looks like based on there, because I kind of think I'm a little bit of a Bond aficionado. I believe it's When Tomorrow Never Dies. I think that's it. Okay, so you were standing on that one, huh?
Oh yeah.
Okay. All righty. Well, for those of you listening on the podcast land or YouTube, you're safe from the amount of copious product that might be filling up the studio here and on the podcast, but
everybody's got their boots on.
They do. And you had a different one last episode, I believe. That's why I was like, oh, okay, cool. Well, we got it there. But hey, it works, right? It works. So, all righty. Well, as we said today, we're going to be talking about the topics of repeaters, and repeaters are quite an interesting thing. I think that most people don't realize how much it's made life easier in two-way communication, and I'm even going to go say this in a different way. Even for consumer day-to-day operation, I bet people don't realize that they're using repeaters in a way without even knowing it.
Oh, I'm sure about that. Like you kind of just mentioned, repeaters have come a long way over the last, what do you want to say, 30, 40, 50 years now, where all forms of communications, whether it be amateur radio, all different kinds, even for law enforcement and all that kind of thing, repeaters have helped quite a bit in extending the coverage range. Instead of just a straight one-to-one talk, we find out now that repeaters are even linked where people can talk on certain different types of communications across the country and not just only in their own backyard.
Yes, and And lots of times if you're a ham and you listen to this podcast, or you're a communication kind of guru and stuff like that, you'll know that repeaters play a big part. But what I'm actually even going ahead and getting at is that, believe it or not, to increase cell phone signals in buildings, there are these things called bidirectional amplifiers.
Yep.
And guess what a bidirectional amplifier is? It's really, in essence, a repeater.
Yes. Definitely. I know that. Problems happened in big cities like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, where some of these big high-rise buildings, especially for security reasons too, where people could get up somewhere in the building and not be able to communicate with other essential people in that same building, even for cell phone usage. And then they have these bidirectional systems in there where they can talk anywhere to anybody in that whole large building.
Yeah, and if we really kind of get, starts to scratch the surface, even if we take a look at it in the day, and we're going back a little bit here now, a couple of decades ago, when satellite radio first came out and was a big thing, out in the country, out in the rural areas, your satellite signal is great, right? You're looking up at the sky, you could see that. But when you get downtown, like, I'm located not too far from Minneapolis, St. Paul, there's times where you barely are looking up and you can't see the sky whatsoever. Satellite radio providers, back when Sirius was separate from XM, they actually used to have they used to call them transponders. Let me go ahead and say it that way. They used to call them transponders, but in essence, what they were repeaters. And yes, in essence, taking that satellite signal coming in on that satellite frequency band and then rebroadcasting it onto a different part of the satellite band. Same thing with cell phone devices called bidirectional amplifiers. Your phone is transmitting to the tower on one frequency, and what it's doing is it's taking and repeating it on another frequency and sending it out. But I guess the biggest thing is that repeaters are they're out there. They may be called different things, but I don't think people realize, how much repeaters impact our daily lives.
Oh, 100% it does. I mean, if we did not, let's just stop and think for a minute. If we did not have any kind of repeaters with anything, you be on a radio, whether it be in your car, in your hand, in your house or something, and you only be able to talk, maybe not that much radius around your house, around your car, or around your handheld. With repeaters, like I said, especially those that are now linked systems, you could talk just about anywhere.
Yeah, and it's funny when you say link, because the linked concept of a repeater really comes into like amateur usage, or maybe, people were linking GMRS repeaters. We're not going to go down that route because that thing was a whole quagmire and still is today. A lot of people have a lot of sore spots on there. But like in essence, you can have repeaters linked together, like you're saying, like, one is at, in Stewartville, and the other one is going to be in Shelbyville, and they're like 30 miles apart. So those two repeaters are linked together. But what a lot of people don't realize, I think, is that when we're talking about repeater and linking, people these days, a lot of commercial systems, more so public safety systems, are going what they call trunked systems. And a trunk system really is nothing more than, instead of just having one repeater at a site, you have multiple repeaters at a site, and then they're all linked together so that you can create different pathways with that repeater. So in essence, you're linking repeaters at that site. So linking of repeaters or connection of repeaters doesn't have to be just, one, like one at one site, one at another site far away. You can have on there to create what they call a trunked radio system.
Oh, yeah, yeah. A good example of that is, like, I know in Wisconsin, they're doing it. This thing called Wiscom, and I'm sure there's other states too. I think Minnesota.
Yeah. Minnesota calls it that. They call it the armor system.
Okay.
Yeah, everybody's got the weird little name for it.
Well, what's nice about that linked system is that, like, in Wisconsin, I'm going to talk about, since I live in Wisconsin, a state trooper, for an example, that works normally, let's say the Green Bay area. All right, that's his hometown. That's where he around that area, around that county. If something should happen where he has to be moved to a different part of the state to help with something, this system of all linking, he could be anywhere in his car and still be able to communicate with wherever he goes. So the linking system, this is how it works really nice for law enforcement, ambulance services, even for the United States government, for Army, Navy, all so on. With the link system, they can have somebody go to a different area and still be able to communicate with other people in that area.
You know, you brought up the government again. They just drove by again. The last episode you did, and I think they're just going to drive by. But yeah, and that's trunking. So that we're not going to dive into trunking too much today because that kind of is its own kind of like a quagmire of trying to understand that. But here's the cool part: is trunking is based off of this concept of repeaters. Now, a repeater, there's actually two types of repeaters, and those that are listening that are CB gurus, okay, that are from there, they're going to understand when I say this, which is a simplex repeater, and then there are duplex repeaters. Now, I think moreover the world is familiar with duplex instead of simplex, but I think, but there are still some simplex repeaters that used to be out there in CB. So the biggest thing that I think to disseminate the two is that the word simplex means just one. For those that may not be aware of it, might be listening, that are not necessarily radio gurus or understanding, simplex means one, singular, okay? It is one frequency used to transmit and receive. You can transmit at the same time you're receiving. Where duplex, of course, means there are two frequencies, dual, duplex, and then what you can do is you can transmit on one frequency at one point in time, and then you're going to listen on the other frequency. And that's where most of the common repeaters kind of come up in this day and age. They're duplex. Now, it goes ahead and adds, like you said at the beginning of the show, how that adds range to it. Because obviously handhelds, well, it depends on this day and age, but a handheld averages 5. Some are saying 10 watts. I wouldn't really want to put that by my head, but let's say an average 5-watt handheld, right? You're not going to go ahead and reach me 30 miles away, correct?
Oh, yeah, true. It'd have to go through a repeater.
Correct. So now and this is like that duplex, like once again, duplex is a common thought of when you say repeater. You're going into that repeater on a 5-watt handheld. Now that repeater's receiving on frequency A, we'll call it. Simultaneously, that repeater obviously is broadcasting on the B frequency, but it increases your power up. So the repeater may put out at 50 watts or 100 watts or 300 watts or whatever it may be. Some repeaters are very high power. And then what's ended up happening then is that you're talking in on that one frequency, but now I'm sitting back and listening to you on the other frequency. And I know on the JJK system, we've done that a lot. We've been like, where was that time that we were doing that test not too long ago, a couple months ago? I think we were like, well, as the crow flies, right? If we were put a pin on it, we were like 60 miles apart, and I'm talking on my handheld into the repeater, and then you're listening on your mobile.
Yeah. I once had, and this isn't really that long ago, maybe about a year ago, I had somebody who knows nothing about two-way radio type communications, and somehow they came up to me and they said, we started talking about different things. Oh, well, you're an amateur radio operator and you know all da-da-da-da-da. It kind of explained to me how you're able to talk to somebody 100 miles away. And I then said, well, let me give it to you this way. And this is kind of the basic same thing. But I says, you have a cell phone. Oh, yeah. I said, okay, well, your cell phone, when you're going to call somebody, your cell phone is going to the nearest tower of the service that you're with, no matter which one it'd be. I said, okay, now through the internet, through landline, it goes to whatever tower that the person you're calling is hooked onto at that time, whether it be 50 miles away or across the country. Repeaters now, think of it this way, where you're going from your cell phone into your cell phone tower, But instead of going over the landline or through the internet to another cell tower, it goes out over the airwaves to that other cell tower. It doesn't do that, but that's, I said, is the basics of what a repeater is like. Oh, okay, now I know what you mean.
Yeah. So, and like I said, people just don't realize that, on that concept on there. But, when we take a look at, so that's the duplex repeater. Now, a simplex repeater, sometimes are also referred to as a store and forward, is a little different. So we're talking one frequency instead of two frequencies. And that one frequency, what's happening is going to need to be the same thing. So we can't do like we do with the duplex repeater, but with the simplex repeater, the device is you're actually talking into it. And if you've never used a simplex repeater, it's weird, but it's kind of cool at the same time. So what I would be is that, let's say, once again, for our listening audience, once again, I'm 30 miles away from Wally, right? I can't hit him from my radio to his radio directly, right? We have to use this repeater. Now, using it as simplex, what I would do is I would key up and I'd be like, hey, Wally, this is John. Do you copy me? When I'm talking, it's going to the tower where that simplex repeater is at. The simplex repeater is storing it. And then the minute I get done talking, it's then going to go ahead and repeat it back out, the same exact thing that it said. Hey, Wally, this is John calling. And it's weird because the amount of time, it's like real time too. So it's like if I'm saying, hi, this is John 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In those few seconds it took me to do it, what has to happen then is that now we need to, I would unkey, and then all of a sudden, hi, this is John 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now you're hearing it on your end, right? So I just heard myself come back to me because it's the same frequency. You heard me come back. Now I have to sit and I have to wait and wait and wait until you have your message. And then you're hearing yourself while that message has come back to me. So is it quick and effective? No, not at all. But is it capable of doing the job?
Yeah. I used to work for a company that they had a simplex repeater system, and it did take a bit to get used to. Another problem people using it forgot is that there is a time limit on that, whether it be 30 seconds, 45, or 1 minute. And if you're talking, let's say there's a 30-second time limit on your transmission. Once you hit that 30 seconds, that repeater is going to all of a sudden stop, and it's going to, whatever it caught, give it to that other person. Then you're going to sit there and, like you said, wait until they talk, and then it comes back to you. So the repeaters that are used in communications, like for amateur or whatever, they have a longer time limit of transmission than just 30 seconds. I think some of them have a minute or 2 minutes, whatever.
Right. And it's obviously what we consider a repeater today. That's more quick, right? Because the minute I'm talking in the repeater, it's coming back out. Now, when it comes to repeaters, we can be in the same band, or we could be what they call crossband too. That's the other cool part. And a lot of these things are deployed. I've seen it deployed in emergency situations, used to link different systems together. And normally you're within the same band for people there. So if you have a VHF repeater, something in the 140 or 150 megahertz range, that repeater usually receives in that same band and transmits in that same band. But and repeaters aren't just for VHF. Let me clarify that. Repeaters are across the whole board. There's low band repeaters, or VHF repeaters, or UHF repeaters, or 800 repeaters, 700 megahertz, 900 megahertz, 1.2 gigahertz. So a lot of repeaters in the upper bands on there. But you can do dual band, which kind of makes it kind of interesting on there. And like we talked about with linking, that linking ability even lets you take a VHF repeater and a UHF repeater, and you can link them together. It doesn't have to be in the same site. It doesn't have to be the same device. So repeaters are really sort of like a Swiss Army knife of communication products.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Another nice thing about repeaters, too, is that, like I said, nowadays, too, you could be sitting in your house or just out your front door with a little tiny handheld and have the capability of talking right now around the world, basically around the world. And this is all because of repeaters. So every day not every day, but every week, every month, new things are coming into the use of repeaters that are, well, what we have today next year is going to be probably a lot better. That somebody somewhere is going to develop something for a repeater that's going to either extend its range or be more capable for general public use.
Yep. Now, let me just take one moment here before we get into the kind of second half of our show here. We're talking about repeaters today, folks, and let me tell you something about it. Repeaters, you don't have to own a repeater. You don't have to go ahead and, have all that product and equipment on your own. You can actually take the time to be able to rent time on a repeater system. And that's where our sponsor here, JJK Communications, Sponsor Communications and Conversations, is here to help. JJK Communications comes out with the JJK Connect system. What is JJK Connect? Well, it is a repeater network, as we're talking about on the show here today. What does that mean for you? That means that if you have business communication, personal communication, family communication, whatever you need to be able to talk with family, friends, business people to get that job done in an instant matter, JJK Communications with their JJK Connect system can assist you in that matter. Long can be the days go by of when we have to take cell phones and send text messaging and call people and get voicemails and stuff like that. No, with the JJK Connect system, you can use a two-way radio system accessing a network of repeaters, as we're talking about today, which allows instant communication. I'm trying to get a hold of Bill, and if Bill's not answering his phone and Bill's not answering text messaging, but I need to get a hold of him, what can I do? Well, with the JJK Connect system, it's simply easy, picking up the radio, keying up and saying, "Hey, Bill, this is John. Do you copy?" And instantly, Bill can answer. No need to be limited, as I call it, by the cellular networks, by where I can get a cell signal, or if I'm busy on my cell phone doing something else instead of actually using it for a cell phone. Check out the JJK Connect system, serving northwestern and west central Wisconsin for all your communication needs.
Okay.
So I guess, we've talked about the repeater, kind of the different aspects of there. I think maybe let's jump back real quick. Let's take a step back and let's talk about the components of a repeater. And in essence, if we were going to do a block diagram, it's three simple blocks, three simple squares, right? It's a receiver, right? The repeater needs to receive.
Yes.
And then there needs to be a controller, the boss. Okay. And then there needs to be a transmitter, because what happens then, obviously it receives, the signal comes in, the RF signal comes in, that radio signal comes in, the receiver receives it, turns it into audio, sends from the audio over to that controller. Now that controller, I think we can both agree, it can be very simple, or there can be a lavish thing that these controllers can do. And then it's going to move to the transmitter, and that transmitter is then going to transmit the signal it just received, but on a different frequency for the most common type of repeater and at an increased power level.
Yep.
But those controllers, I'm just shocked by the controllers that are out there these days for what they can do.
Well, there's another thing in there too, for anybody that may need to know, well, the frequencies of the transmit and the receive frequencies of a repeater are that far apart. There also has to be what they call the duplexers in there to make sure that one does not override that output frequency with the input frequency.
Correct. There is some to the antenna structure that is out there, and if you actually look on our YouTube channel, you're actually going to find an older episode when we were under communications and cigars that shows me kind of talking about the different types of duplexers on there, which combine, because if one's receiving, one's transmitting at the same time, you can't put both in a single antenna. They're going to damage the radios on there, and that's what the duplexer does on there. But for the core sense of that repair, core, well, that's what people call it, core or cost sense, but for the essence of what that equipment is, it really is basically two radios that are tied together. Now, lots of people have, I've seen GMRS operators, I've seen amateur radio operators, I've seen people who like do the ComL ComT thing, more so ComT, take and literally link or connect radios together in an instant, in a situation, to be able to create this ad hoc repeater. And this is where I talked about earlier. Remember, I said dual band. This kind of, quote, repeater setup doesn't just have to be a standalone device. It can link things together too.
Oh yeah. The dual band repeater system is really nice, especially in the circles of amateur radio, where one repeater can take care of both VHF and UHF at the same time. And if the repeater is set up that way, somebody could be coming into it on the UHF side, and somebody listening on the VHF side will hear that, and vice versa. That person then on VHF transmits in, the person on the UHF will hear them.
Yeah. And with this concept that we just kind of talked about here, that controller, so what that controller really does is, because I know some people are probably going to ask about the controller thing, I could just kind of see it coming, is that what is that controller doing, John? Well, what it basically does is when that radio and that repeater receives a signal, okay, or the configuration, we should call it, because I'll get to a point why we might want to call it just a configuration. When it receives that, when that radio receives that audio signal, it sends the audio out of the radio, and it also sends a, what we call a core, carrier operated relay, or a COS sense, carrier operated squelch, which is saying, hey, I'm receiving a signal, controller, wake up. So it's kind of like poking the controller to wake up. The controller then hears that audio, and it's getting poked on the shoulder, and then what the controller does is like, okay, hey, it's going to poke the transmitter now, and when it pokes the transmitter, it's going to poke it and saying like, hey, transmitter, hey, wake up, wake up, wake up. You need to go ahead and broadcast what I'm going to tell you here in a minute. That's what the controller does. Now, as we've extended our communications technology, trunking, digital, all that kind of stuff like that on there, we've started to also have situations where we're not just taking and linking, like I said, one repeater to one frequency to another frequency in a repeater. We're now actually linking, or can link, system of systems. And that's now where we're saying we can take one radio, a transmit and receiver radio, and then put a controller in place to another transmit and receiving radio. And now, like you kind of just mentioned down there about the VHF to the UHF, now we can not only go different bands, but we can even go different technology models. So you can take an 800 megahertz trunked radio on a system, and that can go into a controller, which then will put it out on VHF analog. And then vice versa. Someone tucks it on VHF analog and it crosses over to the 800 megahertz trunk system as an example. So that's why I'm saying repeaters are quite an interesting thing, and more around than people realize.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, I'm going to bring up a point here before I forget. I thought about this, and we should make sure everybody knows this. I think most people do. When you're on a free radio service, now I mean like FRS, GMRS, and all that, and you're using a repeater system in that service, or you are an amateur operator, and you may slip this out of your mind, but you got to remember, what you're saying can be heard by anybody. It's not like a cell phone where it's just one-to-one. So you got to be careful what you're saying, especially if you want to talk about things that are of a private nature that you don't want everybody to know. But when you're going through a repeater system, there are people out there that can tune in to that frequency and hear what you're saying. So it's not 100% private communication.
Yeah, and that's where I think we're going to cover another episode, because I know this is a hot topic right now with scanner listeners and stuff, is the encryption on there. And, you know, some radio services offer encryption as part of being legal to do, and other services don't, right? Like amateur radio, you can't encrypt. You know, GMRS, you can't encrypt. FRS, you can't encrypt. But, like, you know, if you're getting into commercial systems, business systems, and then, once again, public safety systems, encryption is totally on the table. And JJK, the JJK Connect system, which we talked about during the show here, they actually have customers on there that are encrypted for specific purposes and needs and stuff like that on there. So that's going to come in a later episode. But I thought this was going to be a good one because I had someone point out to me my numerous hats that I wear, that people have said repeater usage is down. Repeaters just don't exist the way they used to anymore. And I kind of called BS on that. And a lot of it was done because of a person who made repeater controllers being talked to or interviewed by someone on a different show. And I'm not going to say that person's name or that show or anything like that. But they were going ahead and basing off sales of their stuff. And I'm like, no, you can't base repeaters off of sales. You really can't, because there are so many out there and there's people doing so many things. But like I said, that's why repeater usage are different types. I mean, there's even Wi-Fi repeaters. I mean, I remember back, in the day, well, not the day, but long ago, like a couple of years ago, there was like a Wi-Fi repeater you can actually plug in to just an outlet in your house. So if you have like your router down at the far end of the house, and then, the opposite end of the house can't get that signal, that would repeat that signal on there. And I'm just like,
the Wi-Fi extender.
Yeah,
Yep.
They call them extenders, but in essence, it's repeating the Wi-Fi signal. So, like I said, even though it's quote unquote different names, it's still the concept of repeating on there.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
So,
definitely.
yeah. Well, checking a big old clock on the wall here. Guess what? It is coming up on that time again where we've had a great show talking about repeaters. We try to keep the podcast around 30 minutes. We don't want to go too in depth on there, because then, we just don't want to bore anybody. And I'm worried that we're always going to bore people. But with that, I want to thank my Ed McMahon here today, the co-host, the resident guy here, Wally. Thank you for tuning in and coming in with the podcast with us today. I do really appreciate it. We're going to have you on a few more times here and stuff, but thank you to everyone that is listening. Once again, you can catch it on Podbean, Apple Podcasts. We stepped out to a bunch of different services now, so look up your favorite podcasting service and find out where it is. And until then, thank you, Wally, for coming in.
Oh, glad to be here.
And thank you to everyone else for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode and on the radio.
Okay, goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.